The dusty streets of Ouagadougou buzzed with unusual excitement on a scorching afternoon in March 2023. Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's young military leader, stood before a gathering of confused livestock traders and curious journalists. At just 34 years old, he had already surprised the world by leading a successful coup. But what he was about to announce would leave everyone speechless. "We are going to raise 5 million donkeys," Traoré declared with the confidence of a man who had overthrown governments. The crowd fell silent. Some traders exchanged worried glances, wondering if their president had lost his mind. Others leaned forward, sensing an opportunity they couldn't yet understand. The idea had come to Traoré during a sleepless night 3 weeks earlier. He had been pacing his office, frustrated by Burkina Faso's struggling economy and mounting pressure from international sanctions. His country, landlocked and resource-poor, desperately needed foreign currency. Traditional exports weren't bringing in enough money, and the people were suffering. That's when his agricultural advisor, Dr. Aminata Ouedraogo, burst into his office with a folder full of papers. She was breathless from running across the presidential compound, her hijab slightly askew. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," she said, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. The papers revealed something extraordinary. China, the world's second-largest economy, was facing an unprecedented shortage of donkey skins. Their traditional medicine industry, worth billions of dollars, relied heavily on ajiao, a gelatin made from donkey hides. The substance was believed to have healing properties and was especially popular among wealthy Chinese women for its supposed anti-aging benefits. "They're importing donkey skins from everywhere," Dr. Ouedraogo explained, pointing to trade statistics. "Kenya, Ghana, even Pakistan. But the demand is so high that prices have skyrocketed. A single donkey hide that cost $20 5 years ago now sells for over $200 in Chinese markets." Traoré studied the numbers carefully. His mathematical mind, sharpened by years of military strategy, quickly calculated the potential. If Burkina Faso could supply even a fraction of China's demand, it would transform the country's economy overnight. But there was a problem that made other African countries struggle with this trade. Most nations were simply killing their existing donkeys and selling the skins, leading to rapid depletion of their donkey populations. This short-sighted approach had already caused problems in several countries, with some even banning donkey exports to protect their remaining animals. Farmers were losing their work animals and rural communities were suffering. Traoré saw an opportunity where others saw only quick profit. Instead of depleting existing donkey populations, he would create the world's largest donkey farming operation. The plan was ambitious beyond anything attempted before. 5 million donkeys would be bred, raised, and processed in a sustainable cycle that could continue indefinitely. The next morning, Traoré called an emergency meeting with his cabinet. Ministers arrived expecting to discuss the usual matters of governance, security, or international relations. Instead, they found their president standing before a whiteboard covered in diagrams of donkey breeding cycles and export projections. "Gentlemen and ladies," Traoré began, his voice carrying the authority that had helped him seize power, "we are about to become the donkey capital of the world." Several ministers tried to hide their smiles, thinking their leader was making an unusual joke. Their smiles faded when they realized he was completely serious. Finance Minister Jean-Baptiste Compaoré was the first to speak. "Sir, with respect, do we have the infrastructure for such an operation? 5 million donkeys would require enormous amounts of land, water, and feed. Where would we house them? How would we transport them?" Traoré had already considered these challenges. He pulled out detailed maps of Burkina Faso's eastern regions, areas that had been underutilized due to security concerns from neighboring conflicts. "We'll establish donkey ranches across these provinces," he explained, pointing to vast stretches of savanna. "The land is perfect for grazing and will create thousands of jobs for local communities." The room erupted in discussion. Some ministers were skeptical, worried about the international community's reaction to such an unconventional economic strategy. Others were intrigued by the potential revenue streams. The Minister of Agriculture, Ousmane Sawadogo, was particularly excited about the agricultural benefits of donkey manure for fertilizing crops. As the debate continued, Traoré remained calm and focused. He had learned during his military career that bold decisions often seemed impossible until they were successfully executed. This donkey project would be no different. He was about to challenge conventional thinking and create something that had never been attempted on such a scale. The meeting lasted 6 hours. By the end, Traoré had convinced most of his cabinet that the donkey initiative could work. They agreed to conduct a feasibility study and begin preliminary negotiations with Chinese buyers. Nobody in that room could have predicted how dramatically this decision would change their country's future, or how it would eventually shock one of the world's most powerful nations. As the ministers filed out of the room, Dr. Ouedraogo remained behind. "Sir," she said quietly, "you realize this will make international headlines for all the wrong reasons initially. People will think we've lost our minds." Traoré smiled, the same confident expression he had worn when planning his successful coup. "Let them think what they want," he replied. "History will remember us as the leaders who saved Burkina Faso's economy, with an idea nobody else had the courage to attempt. Sometimes the most ridiculous plans become the most successful ones." Outside the presidential palace, word of the donkey project was already beginning to spread through Ouagadougou's markets and neighborhoods. Street vendors whispered about their president's strange new obsession, while livestock traders began wondering if they should start buying every donkey they could find. None of them could imagine that this seemingly absurd idea would soon make their small, struggling nation one of the most talked-about countries in international trade circles. The Chinese delegation arrived at Ouagadougou Airport on a humid Tuesday morning in April 2023, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Led by Liu Wei, a seasoned trade negotiator from Beijing's Ministry of Commerce, the group had traveled thousands of miles to investigate what their intelligence reports described as either a brilliant business opportunity or an elaborate hoax. We had spent 20 years negotiating deals across Africa, from copper mines in Zambia to oil fields in Chad. He had seen ambitious projects fail spectacularly, and modest proposals exceed all expectations. But never had he been asked to evaluate a proposal involving millions of donkeys from a country most Chinese citizens couldn't locate on a map. As their convoy of black SUVs wound through Ouagadougou's bustling streets, Liu Wei reviewed the preliminary documents his team had prepared. The numbers were staggering. If Burkina Faso could actually deliver 5 million donkey hides annually, it would solve China's Ajiao supply crisis for decades. The traditional medicine industry was worth over $3 billion yearly, and growing demand was creating severe shortages. President Traoré met the Chinese delegation at the presidential palace, wearing his characteristic military fatigues and a confident smile. The meeting room had been carefully prepared, with detailed maps, financial projections, and even samples of local donkey breeds displayed on tables around the room. "Welcome to Burkina Faso," Traoré said in fluent French, which Liu Wei's interpreter quickly translated. "I believe we can solve a very big problem for your country while creating prosperity for mine." Liu Wei studied the young African leader carefully. In his experience, politicians who promised miraculous solutions were usually selling fantasies. But something about Traoré's demeanor suggested serious preparation. The military precision with which the presentation was organized impressed the veteran negotiator. Dr. Ouedraogo stepped forward with a thick folder of research. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, analyzing everything from breeding cycles to transportation logistics. "Our plan is fundamentally different from other African suppliers," she explained through the interpreter. "Instead of depleting existing populations, we're creating a sustainable donkey industry from scratch." The Chinese team listened intently as she outlined the breeding program. Burkina Faso would import high-quality breeding stock from countries with strong donkey genetics, establish climate-controlled breeding facilities, and create a systematic approach to maximize reproduction rates while maintaining animal health standards. Liu Wei raised his first concern. "Mr. President, your proposal requires enormous initial investment. Where will you find the capital to begin such an operation?" Traoré had anticipated this question. He gestured to Finance Minister Compaoré, who presented detailed financial projections. "We're proposing a joint venture structure," Compaoré explained. Chinese companies would provide upfront capital and guaranteed purchase contracts. In return, they receive preferential pricing and exclusive access to our entire output. The room fell silent as Liu Wei and his team absorbed the implications. This wasn't just a simple export agreement. Traoré was proposing to make Chinese companies partners in the world's largest donkey farming operation. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward. Over the next 3 days, the Chinese delegation toured proposed ranch sites across eastern Burkina Faso. They traveled in heavily armed convoys due to regional security concerns, but what they saw impressed them. The land was perfect for large-scale livestock operations, with adequate water sources and grazing areas that could support massive herds. At the largest proposed site, covering over 50,000 acres near the town of Fadangourma, local chief Naba Tigray welcomed the visitors with traditional ceremonies. Through interpreters, he explained how the donkey project could transform his community's economy. "Our young people leave for cities because there are no opportunities here," the elderly chief said, gesturing toward empty fields that had once been productive farmland. "This donkey project would bring jobs, infrastructure, and hope back to our villages." Liu Wei was particularly impressed by the detailed planning for processing facilities. Traoré's team had designed modern slaughterhouses and hide processing plants that would meet international standards for hygiene and efficiency. Everything from waste management to quality control had been carefully considered. On their final evening in Ouagadougou, Liu Wei requested a private dinner with President Traoré. They met at the presidential residence, a modest compound that reflected Burkina Faso's limited resources. Over a meal of local specialties, the two men spoke candidly about the challenges and opportunities ahead. "Mr. President," Liu Wei said carefully, "your plan is ambitious beyond anything I've encountered. But I must ask, why donkeys? Your country has other resources that might be easier to develop." Traoré leaned back in his chair, choosing his words thoughtfully. "Mr. Liu, my country has been poor for too long. Gold mining benefits only a few people. Cotton farming is at the mercy of international price fluctuations. But your country needs donkey skins, and we can provide them sustainably and at scale. This creates a partnership where both nations benefit genuinely." The Chinese negotiator nodded slowly. He had heard many African leaders make grand promises, but Traoré's approach was refreshingly practical. The military leader understood that successful business required mutual benefit, not exploitation. "There are concerns in Beijing," Liu Wei admitted. "Some officials worry about international criticism. Animal rights groups, Western media, environmental activists. They might portray this as Chinese exploitation of African resources." Traoré smiled knowingly. "Mr. Liu, my country faces criticism regardless of what we do. They criticize us for being poor. They criticize us for seeking solutions to poverty. At least with this project, we're creating jobs and generating revenue legally and sustainably." By the end of the week, Liu Wei's team had compiled a comprehensive report recommending Chinese participation in the donkey project. Their conclusion surprised even Beijing officials, who had sent them expecting to politely decline an unrealistic proposal. The report highlighted several factors that made Burkina Faso's approach unique. Unlike other African suppliers who were rapidly depleting their donkey populations, Traoré's plan would actually increase global donkey numbers while meeting Chinese demand. The environmental impact would be minimal compared to other livestock operations, and the economic benefits for rural communities were substantial. Most importantly, the Chinese team believed Traoré's government had the political will and organizational capacity to execute such an ambitious project. The young president's military background had given him experience managing complex logistics and maintaining discipline in challenging environments. As Liu Wei's plane lifted off from Ouagadougou Airport, heading back to Beijing, he reviewed his notes one final time. In his 20-year career, he had never recommended such an unusual partnership. But something about Ibrahim Traoré's donkey project convinced him it might just work. What he couldn't predict was how dramatically this decision would reshape both countries' futures and how the international community would react when the full scope of the operation became public. The first shipment of breeding donkeys arrived at Ouagadougou Airport on a sweltering morning in June 2023, creating a scene unlike anything the facility had ever witnessed. Airport workers stood amazed as cargo planes from Sudan, Morocco, and Egypt unloaded over 3,000 carefully selected animals, each one representing a significant investment in Burkina Faso's economic future. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a British veterinarian specializing in large-scale animal operations, had been hired to oversee the breeding program. She watched nervously as handlers guided confused donkeys down specially constructed ramps onto Burkina Faso soil. Each animal had been selected for specific genetic traits that would maximize reproduction rates and offspring survival. In the local climate, this is either going to be the most successful agricultural project in African history or the most expensive disaster, she muttered to her assistant, a young Burkinabe veterinarian named Dr. Moussa Kabore, who had studied livestock management in France. The selection process for breeding stock had taken months of careful research. Traoré's team had consulted with animal geneticists from universities in Morocco, Kenya, and even Australia to identify the best donkey breeds for their climate and breeding goals. The chosen animals represented a genetic foundation that could theoretically support millions of offspring over several generations. Meanwhile, construction crews were working around the clock to prepare the first major ranch near Fada Ngourma. Chinese construction companies working alongside local labor had built what locals called the Donkey City, a massive facility covering 12,000 acres with modern barns, veterinary clinics, feed storage, and worker housing. The project was creating employment on a scale never seen in rural Burkina Faso. Over 5,000 people had been hired for various roles, from construction workers and ranch hands to veterinarians and administrative staff. Entire villages that had been struggling with poverty suddenly found themselves at the center of an economic boom. Amadou Sawadogo, a farmer from Fada Ngourma, had never imagined he would become a donkey ranch supervisor. For 20 years he had struggled to grow enough millet and sorghum to feed his family. Now he earned more in a month than he had previously made in a year, overseeing breeding operations that would supply Chinese markets. "My children ask me why donkeys have become so important," Amadou told Dr. Mitchell during one of her ranch inspections. "I tell them that sometimes opportunity comes in forms we never expect. These donkeys will pay for their education and build our community's future." The breeding program began with scientific precision that impressed even skeptical international observers. Each donkey was tagged with electronic identification, vaccinated according to international standards, and assigned to specific breeding groups based on genetic profiles. The goal was to maximize reproduction while maintaining animal health and genetic diversity. Dr. Mitchell established breeding protocols based on research from the world's most successful livestock operations. Female donkeys would be bred at optimal ages, pregnancies would be carefully monitored, and offspring would receive intensive care to ensure maximum survival rates. The target was ambitious. Each breeding female should produce at least one healthy offspring annually. The first major test came when international animal welfare organizations learned about the project's scope. Representatives from European and American groups arrived in Ouagadougou, expecting to find evidence of animal cruelty or environmental destruction. Instead, they discovered facilities that exceeded most international standards for livestock care. Rebecca Thompson, a representative from the International Animal Welfare Foundation, had come to Burkina Faso prepared to write a scathing report about African animal exploitation. After touring the facilities, she found herself struggling to identify serious problems with the operation. "The animals appear healthy and well cared for," she admitted reluctantly in her preliminary report. "Housing facilities are spacious, veterinary care is comprehensive, and breeding practices follow accepted international standards. While we remain concerned about the ultimate purpose of this operation, we cannot identify welfare violations in the breeding and housing phases." This unexpected endorsement from animal welfare groups helped legitimize the project internationally. But it also raised questions about why other countries had struggled with sustainable donkey trading while Burkina Faso seemed to be succeeding. The answer lay in Traoré's insistence on long-term thinking over short-term profits. While other African countries had simply killed existing donkeys for immediate revenue, Burkina Faso was building an industry that could operate indefinitely. The initial investment was enormous, but the potential returns were proportionally large. By September 2023, the first generation of donkeys born in Burkina Faso facilities began arriving. Dr. Kabore monitored each birth carefully, documenting everything from birth weights to survival rates. The results exceeded expectations. Over 90% of pregnancies resulted in healthy offspring, far higher than natural breeding rates in traditional settings. The success attracted attention from unexpected sources. Agricultural universities from several countries requested permission to study the breeding program. The World Bank sent representatives to evaluate whether similar projects could be replicated elsewhere. Even the African Union expressed interest in the project as a model for innovative economic development. However, the project's growing success also created new challenges. Local communities began experiencing infrastructure strain as thousands of workers moved to previously quiet rural areas. Housing, water systems, and transportation networks struggled to accommodate the rapid population growth around ranch sites. Traoré addressed these challenges with the same systematic approach he had used for the donkey project itself. His government invested heavily in rural infrastructure, building new roads, schools, and medical clinics in areas surrounding the ranches. What had begun as a donkey breeding project was evolving into comprehensive rural development. The economic impact was becoming impossible to ignore. Rural unemployment in eastern Burkina Faso dropped to near zero. Young people who had been planning to migrate to cities instead found well-paying jobs in their home communities. Local businesses flourished as workers spent their wages on goods and services. Fatimata Ouedraogo, who ran a small restaurant near the largest ranch, had seen her business grow from serving 20 customers daily to over 200. Before the donkeys came, young people left our village every week seeking work in Ouagadougou, she explained. Now they stay, earn good money, and build houses for their families here. The transformation was so dramatic that neighboring countries began sending delegations to study Burkina Faso's approach. Government officials from Mali, Niger, and Chad wanted to understand how their landlocked neighbor had created such rapid economic growth in rural areas. As 2023 drew to a close, the first phase of Traoré's donkey project had exceeded most expectations. The breeding program was successful, international criticism had been minimal, and economic benefits were already visible. But the young president knew the most challenging phase lay ahead, scaling up to millions of animals while maintaining quality standards and international acceptance. What nobody could predict was how dramatically the project would grow, and how its success would eventually create problems that would shock China and reshape international trade in ways nobody had imagined. The transformation of Burkina Faso's economy became impossible to hide by early 2024. International financial institutions that had previously classified the country as one of Africa's poorest suddenly found themselves revising economic forecasts as donkey-related revenue streams began flowing into government coffers at unprecedented rates. The first major processing facility opened in March 2024, a state-of-the-art complex that could handle 10,000 animals monthly while meeting the most stringent international standards for hygiene and efficiency. Chinese quality inspectors worked alongside Burkinabe workers, ensuring every donkey hide met specifications for China's demanding Jiao industry. Li Wei, the facility's Chinese operations manager, had initially been skeptical about working in one of the world's least developed countries. After 6 months overseeing operations, he had become one of the project's most enthusiastic advocates. "The efficiency here surpasses many operations I've managed in Asia," he reported to his supervisors in Beijing. "The local workforce is dedicated, the government support is unwavering, and the quality standards are exceptional." The processing facility represented a crucial milestone in Traoré's broader strategy. Rather than simply exporting live animals, Burkina Faso was adding value through processing, dramatically increasing revenue per animal. A live donkey might sell for $300, but processed hides from the same animal could generate over $800 in Chinese markets. Dr. Mitchell had expanded her role from veterinary oversight to managing the entire biological operation. Working with a team of international and local experts, she had developed protocols that maximized both animal welfare and economic efficiency. The success rate was remarkable. Over 95% of animals reached processing age in perfect health. The scale of operations was becoming extraordinary. By mid-2024, 15 major ranches were operating across eastern Burkina Faso, housing over 400,000 donkeys with expansion plans that would reach the original 5 million target within 3 years. The sight of vast donkey herds grazing across the savanna had become a defining characteristic of the region. International media attention intensified as the project's scope became apparent. CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera sent crews to document what journalists dubbed Africa's donkey revolution. The coverage was largely positive, focusing on job creation and economic development in one of the world's most challenging regions. However, the project's success was creating unexpected complications in China. The sudden availability of massive quantities of high-quality donkey hides was disrupting traditional supply chains and creating price pressures that affected established traders and processors. Jiang Ming, who had operated a traditional ejiao business in Shandong province for 30 years, watched nervously as Burkina Faso hides flooded Chinese markets. "These African hides are excellent quality and much cheaper than what we've been buying from other sources," he explained to his worried suppliers. "But the volume is so large that it's changing everything about our industry." The disruption went beyond simple price competition. Burkina Faso's systematic approach to quality control meant their hides were consistently superior to products from countries that relied on collecting skins from traditional farming or wild populations. Chinese processors began preferring Burkina Faso hides, creating supply problems for traditional suppliers. This market disruption had diplomatic implications that nobody had anticipated. Countries like Kenya and Pakistan, which had been significant donkey hide suppliers, suddenly found their products less competitive. Their governments began pressuring China to limit imports from Burkina Faso, arguing that the African country's systematic approach gave it unfair advantages. President Traoré faced his first major international challenge when a coalition of traditional supplier countries requested a meeting to discuss fair trade practices in donkey hide exports. The meeting, held in Dubai during October 2024, brought together trade officials from 8 countries that felt threatened by Burkina Faso's success. "We respect Burkina Faso's achievements," explained Pakistan's trade minister during the tense discussions. "But their industrial-scale operations are destroying traditional livelihoods across multiple countries. Small farmers who have raised donkeys for generations cannot compete with factory-style breeding facilities." Traoré responded with characteristic directness. "We are not responsible for other countries' failure to innovate or plan sustainably," he stated firmly. Burkina Faso identified an opportunity, invested wisely, and executed professionally. "We will not apologize for success or limit our operations to protect inefficient competitors." The diplomatic pressure increased when the African Union received complaints that Burkina Faso's donkey project was creating unfair competition within the continent. Traditional livestock raising. Countries argued that industrial-scale breeding gave Burkina Faso advantages that violated principles of fair economic competition. These challenges were compounded by logistical problems nobody had fully anticipated. The success of the donkey project was straining Burkina Faso's transportation infrastructure, moving hundreds of thousands of animals and processing massive quantities of hides required trucking capacity that simply didn't exist when the project began. The government responded by investing heavily in transportation infrastructure. But this created new challenges. Building roads and expanding trucking capacity required importing equipment and expertise, which temporarily increased the project's costs and complexity. Environmental concerns also emerged as the scale of operations became apparent. While individual ranches met environmental standards, the cumulative impact of multiple massive livestock operations raised questions about long-term sustainability. Water usage, waste management, and land use patterns were all being scrutinized by international environmental groups. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an environmental scientist from Spain who had been hired to assess the project's ecological impact, spent 3 months studying operations across multiple sites. Her conclusions were more positive than critics had expected, but she identified areas requiring careful monitoring. The environmental impact per animal is actually lower than traditional livestock operations, she reported. Systematic management, modern waste processing, and careful land use planning minimize ecological disruption. However, the sheer scale means even small inefficiencies could have significant cumulative effects. The success was also creating social challenges within Burkina Faso itself. Rural areas that had been economically stagnant for decades were suddenly experiencing rapid change, creating tensions between traditional lifestyles and modern economic opportunities. Young people with new wealth were sometimes abandoning traditional customs, creating generational conflicts. Traditional chief Naba Tigray, who had initially welcomed the donkey project enthusiastically, found himself mediating between progress and tradition. "The donkeys have brought prosperity we never imagined," he reflected. "But prosperity also brings challenges. Our young people must remember their roots even as they build new futures." By December 2024, Burkina Faso's donkey project had generated over $2 billion in revenue, transforming the country from one of Africa's poorest to one of its fastest-growing economies. The success was undeniable, but it had also created complications that would soon force both Burkina Faso and China to confront questions about the future of their remarkable partnership. President Traoré, reviewing progress reports in his office, remained confident about the project's long-term prospects. But he was beginning to understand that success on this scale inevitably created new categories of problems that required equally innovative solutions. The crisis began on a quiet Tuesday morning in February 2025, when Chinese customs officials in Shanghai discovered something that would fundamentally alter the relationship between China and Burkina Faso. In a routine inspection of donkey hide shipments, laboratory technicians found trace amounts of compounds that shouldn't exist in animals raised under normal conditions. Dr. Wang Xiaoli, head of Shanghai's Import Inspection Laboratory, stared at the test results with growing concern. The samples from Burkina Faso showed evidence of synthetic growth accelerators and reproductive enhancers that, while not harmful to humans, indicated a level of biological manipulation that hadn't been disclosed in trade agreements. "This changes everything," Dr. Wang told her supervisor. "These aren't just well-managed traditional donkeys. This is advanced biotechnology being applied to livestock breeding on an industrial scale. The reproductive rates and growth patterns we've been seeing suddenly make sense." The discovery triggered an immediate investigation by Chinese authorities. Within days, teams of scientists and trade officials were reviewing every aspect of Burkina Faso's donkey operation. What they found was far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. President Traoré had not been entirely forthcoming about the scientific methods behind his donkey project's remarkable success. Working with agricultural biotechnology companies from Belgium and Israel, his team had developed breeding enhancement techniques that dramatically improved reproduction rates and animal development while maintaining complete safety. For end users, the technology was legal and ethically sound, but its application on such a massive scale represented a level of agricultural innovation that most experts thought was still years away from practical implementation. Burkina Faso had quietly become home to the world's most advanced livestock biotechnology operation. Dr. Mitchell, who had been aware of the enhanced breeding techniques from the beginning, found herself at the center of an international controversy. "Everything we've done is safe, legal, and effective," she explained to increasingly aggressive investigators. "The animals are healthy, the products meet all safety standards, and the results speak for themselves." The revelation created immediate panic in China's Ejiao industry. If Burkina Faso could produce donkey hides using advanced biotechnology, what prevented them from scaling up production even further? Some industry analysts began predicting that traditional Chinese suppliers would be completely eliminated from the market within 5 years. More troubling for Chinese officials was the realization that they had become dependent on a single African country for a critical traditional medicine ingredient. Over 60% of China's Ejiao supply was now coming from Burkina Faso, creating a strategic vulnerability that made government officials deeply uncomfortable. Li Wei, the Chinese operations manager who had praised the project's efficiency, suddenly understood why everything had seemed too good to be true. "They weren't just better organized than other suppliers," he reported to Beijing. "They were using technology that didn't exist elsewhere. We weren't partnering with traditional African farmers. We were working with one of the world's most advanced agricultural biotechnology operations." The Chinese government faced a dilemma. Burkina Faso's donkey hides were higher quality and more affordable than alternatives, making Chinese consumers and manufacturers happy. But the dependence on enhanced production methods raised questions about long-term sustainability and supply security that government planners found deeply concerning. President Traoré, summoned to emergency meetings with Chinese trade officials, defended his approach with characteristic boldness. "We never claimed to use only traditional methods," he argued. You wanted high-quality donkey hides at competitive prices delivered reliably and sustainably. We provided exactly what you requested using the best available methods. The controversy intensified when details of the biotechnology partnership became public. Environmental groups that had previously endorsed the project began questioning whether enhanced breeding techniques represented artificial manipulation of natural processes. Animal welfare organizations demanded investigations into the long-term effects of reproductive enhancement on donkey health and behavior. International media coverage shifted dramatically. Stories that had previously celebrated Burkina Faso's economic innovation now focused on concerns about biotechnology, dependency, and the implications of industrial-scale animal enhancement. The project that had been held up as a model of African development success suddenly became controversial across multiple continents. The backlash was swift and severe. Several European countries announced they would ban imports of products containing AGO derived from biotechnologically enhanced animals. The United States launched an investigation into whether Burkina Faso's donkey products should be classified as genetically modified organisms, potentially subjecting them to additional regulations. Most seriously, competing supplier countries seized on the controversy to argue that Burkina Faso should be excluded from international trade agreements for failing to disclose the full extent of their production methods. A coalition led by Kenya and Pakistan formally complained to the World Trade Organization about unfair competition from artificially enhanced livestock products. The crisis deepened when Chinese domestic producers began lobbying their government to limit or ban imports from Burkina Faso. Traditional AGO manufacturers argued that enhanced hides were fundamentally different from natural products and shouldn't be allowed to compete in markets for traditional medicines. Our customers expect authentic, natural products, explained Jiang Ming, the Shandong province AGO producer. If they wanted artificially enhanced ingredients, they would buy synthetic alternatives. This Burkina Faso operation threatens the entire concept of traditional Chinese medicine. President Traoré found himself fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. International criticism was mounting, Chinese demand was potentially threatened, and domestic pressure was building from communities whose prosperity had become entirely dependent on the donkey project's continued success. The economic implications were staggering. Over 200,000 Burkinabe were directly employed in donkey-related activities, with perhaps another million people whose livelihoods depended indirectly on the project's success. If Chinese demand collapsed or international restrictions were imposed, the economic devastation would affect nearly a quarter of Burkina Faso's population. In his office late one evening, reviewing crisis management reports, Traoré contemplated the irony of his situation. He had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations, creating an industry that transformed his country's economy and provided China with exactly what they needed. But success had also created vulnerabilities and dependencies that threatened to destroy everything he had built. The young president who had overthrown governments and defied international expectations now faced his greatest challenge. The question was whether the same bold thinking that had created the donkey miracle could find solutions to the crisis it had inadvertently generated. Outside his window, the lights of Ouagadougou twinkled peacefully, but Traoré knew that hundreds of thousands of his citizens were going to sleep uncertain about their futures. The donkey project that had seemed like salvation might be about to become the source of their greatest economic disaster. The resolution came in the most unexpected way, triggered by a phone call that would change everything. On a rainy morning in April 2025, President Traoré received an urgent message from Dr. Chen Lu, director of China's National Institute of Traditional Medicine. The call would transform the crisis into an opportunity that nobody had imagined. "Mr. President," Dr. Chen said through an interpreter, "we need to meet immediately. What your country has achieved isn't just impressive economics. It's a medical breakthrough that could revolutionize healthcare globally." Dr. Chen had been conducting research on AGO samples from Burkina Faso when she made a startling discovery. The biotechnology enhancements that had caused so much controversy were producing donkey hides with significantly higher concentrations of beneficial compounds than traditional sources. The enhanced collagen structure wasn't just different, it was medically superior. The meeting took place in Dubai, neutral territory where both leaders could speak freely. Dr. Chen presented research showing that Ajiao produced from Burkina Faso's enhanced donkeys demonstrated remarkable properties. The carefully controlled breeding, environment, and biotechnology applications had created a product that was not only more potent than traditional alternatives but also more consistent in quality and therapeutic effects. Your enhanced donkeys aren't producing artificial medicine, Dr. Chen explained to a fascinated Traoré. They're producing natural medicine that's been optimized through scientific breeding. It's the difference between a wild apple and a carefully cultivated variety. Both are natural, but one is far superior for human consumption. This revelation completely changed the narrative around Burkina Faso's donkey project. Instead of being criticized for artificial enhancement, the operation could be celebrated for producing superior natural medicine through advanced but ethical breeding techniques. The controversy that had threatened to destroy the project suddenly became its greatest selling point. Dr. Chen proposed something revolutionary. Rather than hiding the biotechnology aspects of the operation, China and Burkina Faso should jointly promote the medical superiority of enhanced Ajiao. They would position the product as next-generation traditional medicine, maintaining cultural authenticity while embracing scientific advancement. The proposal required delicate diplomatic maneuvering. Chinese officials needed to convince domestic producers that enhanced Ajiao represented evolution, not replacement, of traditional practices. International critics needed to understand that the enhancement techniques were improving natural processes, rather than creating artificial substitutes. President Traoré seized the opportunity with characteristic boldness. He proposed establishing an international center for advanced traditional medicine in Ouagadougou, jointly operated by Chinese and Burkinabe scientists. The center would research not just donkey-derived medicine but applications of biotechnology to other traditional healing practices. The announcement of the joint medical research initiative transformed international perceptions overnight. Environmental groups that had criticized the project began praising it as an example of sustainable biotechnology. Medical researchers from universities worldwide requested partnerships to study the enhanced Ajiao's properties. Most importantly, the medical angle resolved the competitive concerns that had created diplomatic tensions. Other donkey-supplying countries couldn't simply copy Burkina Faso's biotechnology approach overnight, but they could participate in the broader research initiative. The project evolved from zero-sum competition to collaborative advancement of medical science. Chinese domestic producers, instead of being displaced by superior imports, became partners in developing applications for enhanced Ajiao. Traditional medicine companies that had felt threatened began investing in research to understand and utilize the improved properties of Burkina Faso's products. The transformation was remarkable. Jiang Ming, the Shandong province producer who had been among the harshest critics, became one of the project's strongest advocates after his own research confirmed the medical superiority of enhanced Ajiao. This isn't about replacing tradition, he explained to other producers. It's about using modern science to perfect traditional healing. By June 2025, demand for Burkina Faso's enhanced Ajiao was exceeding supply by such large margins that President Traoré announced plans to expand operations to 10 million donkeys within 5 years. The price premium for enhanced products meant that revenues would grow even faster than production volumes. The economic impact on Burkina Faso was transformational beyond anyone's original projections. The country had become not just a supplier of raw materials, but a center of medical innovation that attracted researchers, investors, and partnerships from around the world. Universities were establishing campuses in Ouagadougou specifically to study biotechnology applications in traditional medicine. Rural communities that had benefited from the original donkey project found themselves at the center of an international medical research hub. Young Burkinabe who had learned donkey husbandry were now studying advanced biotechnology and medical research. The project had created not just jobs but entirely new career paths for an entire generation. The diplomatic success was equally impressive. Countries that had initially criticized Burkina Faso's approach were now requesting technical assistance to develop their own enhanced traditional medicine programs. The African Union endorsed the project as a model for combining traditional knowledge with modern science. International recognition culminated when President Traoré was invited to address the World Health Organization about sustainable approaches to traditional medicine development. The young military leader who had once been dismissed as an African strongman was now being consulted by global health experts about the future of medical innovation. The Donkey Project's success had implications far beyond economics or medicine. It demonstrated that developing countries could become innovation leaders rather than simply resource suppliers. Burkina Faso's approach showed that traditional practices could be enhanced through science without losing their cultural authenticity. Dr. Mitchell, reflecting on the extraordinary journey from the first breeding donkeys to international medical breakthrough, marveled at how completely the project had exceeded everyone's expectations. "We thought we were raising donkeys for Chinese traditional medicine," she told reporters. "We ended up creating a new model for sustainable biotechnology that's being studied worldwide." As 2025 drew to a close, President Traoré stood in the same office where he had first conceived the Donkey Project 2 years earlier. Outside his window, construction cranes were building research facilities that would house scientists from dozens of countries. The economic transformation was complete, but the scientific revolution was just beginning. The young president who had shocked the world by announcing plans to raise 5 million donkeys had achieved something far more significant. He had demonstrated that bold vision, combined with scientific innovation and international cooperation, could transform not just a country's economy, but contribute to global progress in ways that nobody had thought possible. The Donkey Project that had begun as a desperate attempt to generate foreign currency had become a symbol of African innovation and a model for sustainable development worldwide. Most importantly for the people of Burkina Faso, it had proven that their small, landlocked country could compete and succeed on the global stage through intelligence, determination, and the courage to pursue ideas that others considered impossible.